When I look back on it, I think the argument really started with a coffee machine. Not just any coffee machine, the coffee machine. The kind that costs as much as a used car, promises to bring barista-level artistry into your home, and requires its own corner of the kitchen and probably a PhD in engineering. It gleamed on the store shelf, radiating sophistication, and to hear Finn talk about it, you'd think it was the Holy Grail. "I'm telling you, this is life-changing," Finn said, his hands almost reverent as he gestured at the machine like a game show model. "Imagine waking up and having the perfect latte waiting for you. No lines, no burnt milk, no snooty baristas judging your order. Just perfection. Imagine waking up and knowing you didn't just blow a mortgage payment on a coffee machine." I countered, crossing my arms. Finn turned to me, his eyes wide with the fervor of a caffeinated zealot. "Okay, but hear me out. It's not just about coffee. It's an investment in quality of life." "Finn," I said slowly, as if reasoning with a toddler wielding scissors, "you already have a perfectly good coffee maker." "That thing?" He wrinkled his nose. "That's a glorified kettle. I want something that makes coffee an experience. This thing froths oat milk like a cloud." "I couldn't help it," I laughed. "You're paying for the milk froth? Are we even the kind of people who own a $2,000 coffee machine?" Finn tilted his head like I just asked if we were the kind of people who deserved happiness. "Why not? We work hard. We deserve nice things." It wasn't the first time Finn had been swept away by something extravagant. He was an aesthete at heart, someone who believed in the magic of beautiful objects and luxurious indulgences. Meanwhile, I was not. My tastes leaned toward the utilitarian, the practical. Growing up, my family didn't buy shiny gadgets for the kitchen. We used the same dented appliances until they practically begged to be replaced. If it worked, it stayed. Simple as that. But this coffee machine wasn't about working. It was about living, as Finn put it, and the more he waxed poetic about the joy it would bring, the more I felt like a killjoy for resisting. I wasn't blind to the appeal. It was a gorgeous piece of machinery. But every time I glanced at the price tag, my chest tightened. We stood there in the store for what felt like forever, locked in an unspoken battle. Finn wanted the machine. I wanted to walk out with my wallet intact, and neither of us wanted to be the bad guy who said no to the other. So, naturally, we compromised in the worst possible way. We didn't buy it, but we didn't leave, either. The stalemate followed us home, hanging heavy over everything we did. Over dinner that night, Finn sighed dramatically as he stirred his spaghetti. "I don't get it," he said. "You'll drop money on boring stuff like new tires or a vacuum, but when it comes to something that actually sparks joy, you shut down." I nearly choked on my food. New tires aren't boring. They're necessary. You like not dying in a car accident, right? "That's not the point," Finn said, his voice rising slightly. "It's like you don't even want to enjoy life. Like you're afraid to let go and splurge on something that makes you happy." "That's not fair," I snapped. "Just because I don't think spending $2,000 on a coffee machine is smart doesn't mean I don't want to enjoy life. It means I don't want to stress about bills for the next 6 months." Finn set his fork down with a loud clink. "We're fine financially. You're acting like we're one splurge away from bankruptcy. And you're acting like money grows on trees." I shot back. "What happens if something unexpected comes up? I don't want to be sitting on a fancy latte machine thinking, wow, this really makes up for the fact that we can't afford a new water heater." He stared at me like I just insulted his firstborn. "You're impossible," he muttered, pushing his chair back and retreating to the living room. The days that followed were a masterclass in passive aggression. Finn started sighing loudly every time he made coffee, clattering the old machine around like it had personally insulted him. I retaliated by pointedly looking at our budget spreadsheet whenever he brought it up, muttering things like, "Oh, wow, sure glad we're not in the red because of oat milk clouds." Still, underneath the pettiness, I could feel the deeper rift growing. This wasn't really about a coffee machine. It was about the way we saw the world, the way we prioritized and feared and dreamed. Finn lived in the moment. I planned for the worst. He believed in rewarding yourself for hard work. I believed in saving for rainy days. Both of us thought we were right. Neither of us wanted to admit that maybe we both were. The breakthrough came on a random Wednesday night. when we found ourselves scrolling through Netflix in a shared, awkward silence. Finn, sipping his mediocre coffee, finally broke the ice. "Okay," he said. "What if we did a coffee subscription instead?" I blinked at him. "A what?" "A coffee subscription," he repeated. "Like, we get really good beans delivered to us every month. It's still an upgrade, but it doesn't involve selling my kidney for a machine." It wasn't the grand apology or admission of compromise I'd expected, but it was something. A small bridge between his need for indulgence and my need for financial sanity. And I realized then that maybe I'd been holding onto my position too tightly, too defensively, because I was afraid of losing something else. Control, maybe, or the security I associated with practicality. So I met him halfway. "What if," I offered, "we also set aside a savings fund for something big? Not necessarily a coffee machine, but, I don't know, something we both want? Like a vacation?" Finn's eyes lit up, and I felt my shoulders relax for the first time in days. Deal. The tension eased after that, though neither of us quite got what we'd originally wanted. The coffee subscription is great, but Finn still gazes longingly at that stupid machine whenever we pass it in a store. And while I'm glad we didn't buy it, I sometimes catch myself wondering if I'm too rigid, too stuck in my ways to enjoy the little luxuries he loves so much. So, I'm asking you all, AITA for refusing to splurge, or was Finn the unreasonable one? Or maybe we're just two stubborn people trying to figure out how to be a team without losing ourselves in the process. It started with a whiteboard and a dry erase marker, a ridiculous amount of caffeine, and the kind of manic energy only two creative people in love could produce. "Picture it," Ethan said, his eyes gleaming as he drew a crooked triangle on the board. "A podcast, but not just any podcast. A serialized audio drama about time-traveling detectives who solve crimes before they happen. We'll call it Future Crimes." He drew a little explosion next to the triangle for emphasis. I nodded, tapping my pen against my notebook. "Okay, love the premise. But hear me out. What if instead of detectives, they're pastry chefs? Like, they time travel to bake the perfect desserts before their customers even realize they're craving them?" Ethan stared at me for a moment, like I just announced I was quitting my job to join a cult. "Pastry chefs?" he repeated. "You're kidding, right?" "No, think about it." I leaned forward, energized. "You've got time travel mechanics, food-based mysteries, maybe a subplot about the ethics of altering taste buds across timelines. It's quirky, it's fresh, it's stupid," Ethan interrupted. He capped his marker with an annoyed flourish. "No offense, but that's not going to hook anyone. People want suspense, intrigue, action, not croissants." And that was our first fight. We didn't even finish brainstorming that night. Ethan insisted we stick with his idea, and I was convinced mine was more interesting. But we didn't call it quits, because quitting wasn't our style. Instead, we decided to compromise by splitting the workload. Ethan would handle the narrative structure, and I'd focus on dialogue and world building. It sounded fair on paper. In practice, it was a disaster. From the start, Ethan approached the project like a high-budget action flick. His scripts were packed with chase scenes, explosions, and convoluted plot twists. I tried to add nuance, subtle character development, clever banter, even a little emotional depth, but every suggestion I made seemed to bounce off his ego like a rubber ball. "I'm not sure the villain needs a monologue about nihilism," I'd say. "It feels a little on the nose." Ethan would nod solemnly and then ignore me completely. Meanwhile, my contributions weren't exactly winning him over, either. I had a tendency to go off on tangents, adding random bits of lore or inserting bizarre one-liners that I thought were hilarious. "Why does the robot's sidekick speak only in Shakespearean insults?" Ethan asked one night, exasperated. "Because it's funny," I said, laughing at my own joke. Ethan didn't laugh. "We're supposed to be building tension, not auditioning for a sketch show," he muttered. Soon, the cracks in our compromise became impossible to ignore. Ethan started rewriting my dialogue without telling me, and I'd retaliate by accidentally deleting chunks of his action sequences during revisions. We both pretended not to notice the passive aggression, but it seeped into everything we did. By the time we recorded our first episode, We were barely speaking except to argue over microphone placement and sound effects. The recording process was an ordeal in itself. Ethan wanted the soundscape to be immersive, footsteps echoing, doors creaking, futuristic gadgets whirring. I agreed, in theory, but his perfectionism bordered on insanity. We spent an hour trying to capture the exact pitch of a laser beam, with Ethan insisting it should sound less pew-pew and more zoom. When I suggested we just download a stock sound, he looked at me like I'd proposed sacrificing artistic integrity on the altar of mediocrity. Meanwhile, I wasn't exactly a saint. My obsession was with the voice acting. I insisted on delivering all the lines for the protagonist, Detective Cade Albright, even though Ethan was clearly better suited for the role. "You're too monotone," I argued when he offered to audition. "Cade needs charisma." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Charisma? You literally made him say, 'Time is a flat croissant.'" "It's called wit, Ethan." "It's called nonsense," he shot back. By the time we uploaded the first episode, our relationship was held together by duct tape and the shared hope that maybe, just maybe, the final product wouldn't suck. It sucked. The pacing was chaotic, the dialogue was cringy, and the sound effects were so overdone they made listeners laugh in all the wrong places. One reviewer called it the audio equivalent of a drunk film student trying to direct a Christopher Nolan movie with a kazoo. Ethan and I sat in stunned silence, reading the reviews together. After a while, he said, "Well, at least they spelled our names right." I couldn't help it. I started laughing. Not a little chuckle, but full-blown, tears streaming down my face laughter. "We're a disaster," I wheezed. Ethan cracked a smile. No argument there. But the laughter didn't fix everything. Over the next few days, we started unpacking what went wrong. Ethan blamed my lack of focus, and I accused him of creative dictatorship. We rehashed every petty disagreement, every ignored idea, every moment where we'd silently wished the other would just do the whole damn thing alone. By the end of it, we were both exhausted, emotionally and creatively. The podcast is still up, though neither of us has touched it since. Ethan wants to try again with a new concept, but I'm hesitant. Part of me wonders if we're just too different to collaborate without imploding. Another part of me wonders if I was too stubborn, too unwilling to let go of my own ideas. And the worst part? I still think Time is a Flat Croissant was hilarious. It was supposed to be the night where all the threads of my life came together. My debut gallery show. Months of sleepless nights spent hunched over canvases, the smell of turpentine permanently etched into my skin. All for this moment. The space I rented was perfect. Industrial chic, with exposed brick and just enough pretension to impress the kind of people who use the word curated in casual conversation. My friends, my family, even my boss. All were here to witness the first chapter of my dream coming true. The gallery buzzed with excitement as people milled about, sipping cheap wine and murmuring approvingly at the paintings. I caught snippets of conversation. The brushwork is so raw. It's like she's peeling back layers of herself. I floated through the room, smiling graciously, feeling for the first time like maybe, just maybe, I deserved this spotlight. And then came Laura. Laura was one of those people who entered a room and changed its gravitational pull. She wasn't just my best friend. She was my shadow self, the one I admired and envied in equal measure. She was the friend who always seemed to know the right thing to wear, the right thing to say, the right people to schmooze. I invited her because she's been my ride or die since college. But there was always a tiny, flickering worry in the back of my mind when Laura was involved. Could she just let me have this one thing? She showed up fashionably late, of course, wearing a vintage sequin dress that caught the gallery lights like she was dipped in stars. The room practically sighed in unison at her entrance. I watched as she hugged people with that perfect blend of familiarity and grace, making them feel like they were in on some cosmic joke only she understood. She made her way to me, beaming. "Oh my God, babe, this is incredible," Laura said, pulling me into a hug. "You did it. I'm so proud of you." I felt the warmth of her words and allowed myself to relax. Maybe tonight would be different. Maybe she would just be here for me. I pushed aside my doubts and returned the hug. "Thanks, Laura. It means a lot that you're here." For the next 20 minutes, things were fine. She laughed at my jokes, complimented my work, and even helped fend off an overly chatty couple who didn't quite grasp that gallery talk doesn't involve asking how much money I make. But then, as I was in the middle of explaining the meaning behind one of my pieces to a small group, Laura clinked her glass. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, her voice cutting through the hum of conversation, "but I just have to share some news." My stomach tightened. I knew that tone, the "this is going to be about me" tone. I wasn't planning on saying anything tonight, but I just can't keep it in anymore, Laura continued, her eyes sparkling. "I got offered a role in a major independent film. I'll be playing the lead." The room erupted into applause, and suddenly everyone was around her, asking about the film, the role, the director. Laura played coy at first, but within minutes, she was holding court, reenacting parts of her audition and gushing about how this could be her big break. My big night had just been eclipsed by her big news. I stood there, plastering on a smile so tight it felt like it might crack. Every part of me screamed to say something, to pull the focus back to my art, but I hesitated. Maybe I was being selfish. Maybe I should just let her have this moment. After all, we were friends, right? Friends support each other. But as the minutes turned to an hour and Laura's impromptu Q&A session showed no signs of stopping, my patience snapped like an overextended rubber band. She had hijacked my night, my work, my dream, and turned it into a backdrop for her own story. I couldn't let this slide. Not tonight. I marched over to her little circle and clinked my glass loudly, mimicking her earlier interruption. "Hey, everyone," I said, my voice cutting like a knife. "I just wanted to thank you all for coming tonight. It really means a lot to me to have your support for my art, which is what we're all here to celebrate. Remember that? The art." The room went silent. Laura blinked, her smile frozen like she hadn't quite processed what I'd said. "Of course, babe. We're all so proud of you." I crossed my arms. "Are you? Because it feels like you turned my gallery opening into a press junket for your latest adventure." A few awkward chuckles rippled through the crowd, but most people avoided eye contact. Laura's expression darkened. "I wasn't trying to take anything away from you," she said, her voice quieter but edged with steel. "I thought you'd be happy for me." "I am happy for you," I said, my words spilling out faster now. "But couldn't you have waited? Just one night? This was supposed to be my moment, Laura. For once, couldn't it have been about me?" The tension in the room was suffocating. Laura's face flushed red, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and said, "I can't believe you're doing this right now. If this is how you treat your friends, maybe you don't deserve a moment." With that, she grabbed her purse and stormed out. The room buzzed with uncomfortable whispers. People started leaving soon after, clearly eager to escape the fallout. My perfect night had crumbled into a pile of awkward silences and half-hearted goodbyes. Now, as I sit here staring at the unsold paintings stacked in the corner of my studio, I keep replaying the scene in my head. Should I have kept quiet? Let her have her moment, even at the expense of mine? Or was I right to call her out for stealing the spotlight? AITA? The invitation arrived on a Thursday, folded neatly into an envelope that shimmered like it had been dipped in moonlight. Mara almost threw it away, mistaking it for junk mail, but her fingers paused on the smooth parchment paper inside. The calligraphy was elegant, as though written by an impossibly steady hand. "You are cordially invited to a dinner of significance, to be held at your residence this Saturday, at precisely 8 p.m. Attendance is mandatory." She frowned. Mandatory? The paper didn't include a name or a signature, just an ornate wax seal of a crescent moon at the bottom. She flipped it over. Nothing. Mara figured it had to be a joke. Carly, probably, trying to mess with her after their last haunted house debacle. She tossed the invitation onto the counter and forgot about it. Until Saturday evening. She was on the couch, half asleep, watching a rerun of some cooking competition when the doorbell rang. The sound echoed strangely in the stillness of the house, louder than it should have been. Mara checked the time, 7:58. When she opened the door, she found a tall man in a crisp, three-piece suit standing on her porch. His hair was silver, but his face was ageless, and his eyes had a gleam that made Mara uneasy. Miss Caro, he said with a faint smile, his voice as smooth as velvet. I trust you received the invitation? Mara blinked. Yeah, but... Excellent. We're ready to begin. Without waiting for her response, he stepped past her into the house, his polished shoes silent against the floor. Wait, begin what? She asked, spinning to face him. He didn't answer. Instead, he snapped his fingers, and the house transformed. Her modest living room stretched and twisted, becoming a grand dining hall bathed in golden light. The walls were lined with floor-to-ceiling mirrors, their surfaces rippling like water. A massive table dominated the center, draped in a crimson cloth and set with silver plates and gleaming goblets. Candles floated in midair above it, their flames flickering without smoke. Mara stumbled back, her heart racing. What the hell is this? The man turned to her, his smile widening. The dinner of significance. You are the host, after all. I didn't agree to this, she snapped. You didn't need to. The invitation chose you. Before she could argue, a sharp knock came at the door. The man raised an eyebrow. The guests have arrived. Shall we? He opened the door, and they began to file in. The first guest was a woman with hair like liquid gold, wearing a gown that shimmered like 1,000 stars. Her eyes glittered as she entered, and she inclined her head toward Mara with an air of royalty. Next was a figure wrapped entirely in shadows, their edges constantly shifting, like smoke trying to hold itself together. They didn't walk so much as glide across the floor. Then came a man in a cloak the color of dried blood, his face obscured by a mask shaped like a snarling wolf. He paused by Mara, the mask tilting as though he were appraising her. Good luck, he muttered, his voice low and gravelly, before taking a seat at the table. The room continued to fill. Each guest was stranger than the last. A woman with antlers adorned with vines and blossoms, a creature with two mini eyes blinking in unison, a pair of twins who moved in eerie synchronization, their smiles never quite reaching their eyes. Mara felt like she was trapped in a surreal fever dream. I don't belong here, she whispered to the silver-haired man, who was now standing by her side. He chuckled. Oh, but you do. Tonight, you are the center of the feast. The center? What did that even mean? Before she could press him, the man clapped his hands, and the room fell silent. The guests turned their attention to him, their otherworldly eyes gleaming. Friends, he began, his voice carrying an impossible authority, we gather tonight to witness a moment of great significance, a choice that will ripple through worlds. Mara's stomach twisted. What choice? The man didn't answer her directly. Instead, he gestured to the table. In the center, where the plates and goblets had been moments ago, sat a single object, a knife with a blade so sharp it seemed to hum in the air. You must choose, the man said, his eyes locking onto hers. Choose what? She demanded, her voice shaking. Whose reality to unravel? Mara froze. What? He gestured to the guests. Each of them represents a thread in the fabric of existence. One thread must be severed tonight, and you have been chosen as the arbiter. Her knees felt weak. No, I can't. You must, he said gently, though there was steel in his voice. The balance depends on it. Mara turned to the guests, who were now watching her with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Some looked indifferent, while others seemed to plead with their eyes, or whatever passed for eyes. Her gaze fell on the golden-haired woman, who tilted her head, her expression unreadable. The shadowy figure seemed to shrink, as if trying to become invisible. The twins smiled, their movements eerily synchronized. I don't even know what's at stake, Mara shouted, her voice echoing off the mirrored walls. The man's expression softened. You don't need to. All you need to do is decide. The room felt like it was closing in on her. Her hands trembled as she stepped toward the table, the knife gleaming under the floating candles. She could feel the weight of 100 unseen worlds pressing down on her. As her fingers curled around the hilt of the knife, a thought struck her. What happens if I refuse? The man's smile faded. Then all the threads unravel. Mara swallowed hard, her mind racing. Each guest's face, or whatever passed for it, flashed before her eyes. Who were they? What were they? And what gave her the right to decide their fate? But the alternative was unthinkable. With a deep breath, she raised the knife, her hand steadying as she made her choice. When the blade came down, the mirrors shattered, the light imploded, and the house screamed around her. When Mara opened her eyes, she was back in her modest living room. The invitation lay on the coffee table, charred at the edges. The world felt different. Lighter, maybe. Or was it heavier? She couldn't tell. The only thing she knew for certain was that somewhere, a thread had been severed, and the universe was already adjusting to the change. When I entered the giveaway, it was more of a joke than anything else. A what-if scenario to entertain myself during my lunch break. Win VIP tickets to the edge of the arena grand finals, the post had promised. The pinnacle of the esports world. The Super Bowl of pixelated mayhem. For someone like me, who'd spent years watching live streams and arguing on forums about game metas, this was the event. The golden ticket. But I never expected to win. So, when the email hit my inbox, subject line, "You're headed to the finals," I was convinced it was spam. I even hovered over the link like it might bite me. Only after I triple-checked the sender and cross-referenced the contest page did I start screaming. The first person I called was Jules. Jules, my best friend and partner in online crime, had been my duo since the first season of Edge of the Arena. We'd laughed, we'd raged, we'd spent hours perfecting callouts and strategies. Jules knew the game like a second language, and while I was content to nerd out in the comfort of my living room, they were always the bigger fan of the scene. They followed the players, memorized stats, and got genuinely misty-eyed at montages. I knew they'd lose their mind over the tickets, and they did. "This is fate," Jules shouted over the phone. "It's destiny. We're gonna see the finals in person. VIP, too. Oh my God. We might even meet the players." I was riding high on their excitement until they dropped the line that shifted everything. "Let's plan to get there, like, 6 hours early." I almost dropped my phone. 6 hours? Jules, the venue doesn't even open until 2. Exactly, they said, as if this was the most reasonable thing in the world. "We need to be there before the lines start forming. Meet other fans, swap pins, vibe with the crowd. It's all part of the experience. This isn't just a match, it's a pilgrimage." A pilgrimage. That's Jules for you. Always romanticizing the weirdest parts of life. I tried to laugh it off. "Jules, you're insane. We have VIP tickets. That means no lines, no waiting, no stress. Why would we camp out like peasants?" "It's not about needing to. It's about wanting to. This is history, and I want to be immersed in it. But I don't want to spend half the day standing around outside," I said, already picturing my feet hurting and my introvert battery draining at the thought of small talk with strangers. "We can just show up, skip the line, and still enjoy the match." That's when I heard Jules sigh. It wasn't just a sigh. It was the sigh. The one that says, "I love you, but you're hopeless. Come on, Liv. It's more than just the match. The fans, the energy, the hype. You'll love it once you're there." I didn't believe that for a second, but Jules was so excited I didn't want to argue. "Fine," I said, reluctantly. "We'll figure it out." The day of the finals, we still hadn't exactly figured it out. Jules woke me up at the crack of dawn with a chipper text. "On my way. Got snacks for the line." I stared at my phone like it had personally betrayed me. They were serious about this whole camping out thing. I, meanwhile, was still in my pajamas, sipping coffee, and wondering if there was any way I could salvage my Saturday. By the time Jules arrived at my apartment, decked out in a custom jersey and carrying a bag of goodies, I knew I couldn't weasel my way out. "Ready to go?" they chirped. "Not even remotely," I muttered, but I grabbed my hoodie and followed them out the door. The crowd outside the arena was exactly what I'd feared. A chaotic mash of die-hard fans, scalpers, and cosplayers. People were singing team chants and arguing over strategies. Someone had brought a boombox and was blasting the game's theme music. Jules immediately threw themselves into the chaos, chatting with strangers, snapping pictures, and trading pins with a kid in a ridiculous foam helmet. I, on the other hand, lurked on the edges, pretending to scroll through my phone while silently cursing myself for agreeing to this. It wasn't that I didn't like the game. I loved it. But this was sensory overload on steroids. By the time the doors opened, I was already exhausted, and the match hadn't even started. Inside, things didn't get much better. Jules wanted to explore every corner of the venue, from the merch booths to the photo ops. I just wanted to collapse into our cushy VIP seats and breathe for a minute. But Jules dragged me along, buzzing with excitement while I muttered half-hearted responses. Finally, we made it to our seats. I'll admit, they were amazing, close enough to the stage that I could see the players' reactions in real time, but far enough back to avoid being blinded by the lights. For a brief moment, I let myself relax. The hype videos started playing, the crowd roared, and I felt a flicker of excitement. Maybe this would be worth it after all. Then Jules leaned over and said, "Isn't this so much better because we got here early?" I looked at them, incredulous. "Are you kidding? I'm already ready for a nap." They laughed, but I wasn't joking. And as the match unfolded, an epic, nail-biting back and forth that had the whole arena on their feet. I couldn't shake the tension between us. I knew Jules was having the time of their life, and I hated that I couldn't just enjoy it with them. But I also hated that they pushed me into a situation I didn't want in the first place. When the final play happened, a perfect, last-second clutch that sent our favorite team to victory, the entire arena erupted. Jules turned to me, eyes shining, and hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. For that moment, I felt the spark of why I'd loved this game in the first place. The connection, the camaraderie, the sheer joy of being part of something bigger than yourself. But as we walked back to the car, feet aching and ears ringing, I couldn't help but wonder, did I actually enjoy it, or did I just survive it for Jules's sake? So now I'm left with this nagging feeling. Did I ruin the day by being a grump? Or was it fair to want to enjoy the finals my way? I don't know. The letter had arrived on a Thursday, a creamy envelope with her name scrawled in thick, looping handwriting. It had no return address, just a wax seal pressed with an unfamiliar crest, a serpent coiled around a compass. Evie hadn't opened it immediately. She'd been running late for work, juggling a coffee cup and a half-eaten bagel, but the image of it stayed with her all day, niggling at the back of her mind like an unfinished sentence. By the time she got home, it sat on the counter like a dare. She tore it open, her curiosity outweighing her hesitation. Inside was a single piece of parchment, the handwriting as ornate as the seal. "Miss Evangeline Harper, you are cordially invited to participate in the game. Arrive promptly at 11:59 p.m. at 13 Parthwood Lane. Do not bring guests. Do not be late. Failure to attend will be considered forfeiture. The curator." Evie read it 3 times, her brow furrowed. A game? She didn't sign up for any game. And who called her Evangeline anymore? Not since her grandmother passed. Parthwood Lane wasn't far, just across town. She debated throwing the letter away, chalking it up to an elaborate prank. But something about the words, the strange formality, tugged at her. And if she was honest, her life had grown so monotonous that even the prospect of a bizarre late-night summons seemed alluring. By 11:30, she was driving through the deserted streets, her headlights cutting through the fog. Parthwood Lane wasn't marked on GPS, but she found it anyway. A narrow, overgrown road that seemed to emerge from the mist itself. At its end stood a dilapidated mansion, its windows aglow with flickering light. She parked and hesitated, her heart thudding in her chest. The air smelled of damp earth and faintly of roses. It was eerie, sure, but not enough to send her running. Not yet. The door creaked open before she could knock. A tall man with pale skin and unnaturally dark eyes stood in the entryway. He was dressed in a black suit, the lines of it impossibly sharp. "Miss Harper," he said, inclining his head. "Welcome. The others are waiting." He turned and walked away, clearly expecting her to follow. "Others," she muttered under her breath, but stepped inside. The air was thick with the scent of candle wax and something metallic, like old coins. The foyer led to a grand ballroom where a group of people stood in tense clusters. There were 6 of them in total, including her, and they all looked as confused as she felt. A woman in a sequin dress was arguing with a scruffy man in a leather jacket. 2 identical-looking blondes whispered furiously to each other. And then there was the teenager in a hoodie who sat on the floor, scrolling through his phone like none of this was unusual. The tall man appeared at the head of the room. "The rules are simple," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "You will each receive a key. Only one will open the door at the end of the hall. The door leads to an opportunity." "What kind of opportunity?" asked the woman in sequins, her eyes narrowing. "That depends," the man replied with a faint smile, "on who you are." Evie felt a chill creep down her spine. The man gestured, and a tray appeared, seemingly from nowhere, holding 6 identical brass keys. The group approached warily, each taking one. The keys were cold and heavier than expected, and Evie's had a strange marking etched into the metal, a crescent moon. "This is ridiculous," the leather jacket man scoffed, tossing his key in the air and catching it. "What's behind the door? A timeshare presentation?" The tall man's smile didn't waver. "You'll find out, if you can open it." And with that, the game began. The hallway stretched ahead, lined with doors, but the man had said the door. Singular. Evie clutched her key tightly as she and the others spread out, testing locks at random. None of them fit. Tension rose like steam, and frustration began bubbling over. "Did anyone even ask what happens if we don't open it?" asked the teenager, looking up from his phone. No one answered. No one wanted to think about it. Evie tried to stay calm, moving methodically from door to door. But as the minutes ticked by, unease coiled tighter in her chest. She glanced at the others. Sequins was muttering to herself, Leather Jacket was kicking doors, and the twins had stopped testing locks entirely, standing eerily still in the middle of the hall. Then she noticed something odd. Her crescent-marked key was warm now, almost hot. It seemed to hum faintly, like it was alive. She stopped at a door that looked no different from the rest but felt right. The wood was smoother under her fingers, the air heavier around it. She slid the key into the lock, and it turned smoothly. The door creaked open, revealing a room bathed in golden light. At its center stood a table, and on the table lay a single object, a compass, its needle spinning wildly. Evie stepped inside, and the door slammed shut behind her. She spun around, pounding on the door, but it didn't budge. "Hey, what the hell?" The needle on the compass stilled, pointing straight ahead. She turned slowly to see a second door, smaller and marked with the same crescent moon as her key. The rules hadn't mentioned anything after the first door. Her fingers hesitated on the handle, but the compass pulsed in her palm like a heartbeat, urging her forward. She pushed the door open, stepping into darkness. The world seemed to tilt, and then she was standing in the middle of a bustling city street. But it wasn't any city she knew. The sky was an impossible shade of violet, and the air shimmered with golden motes. People in strange, elegant clothing hurried past, their faces unfamiliar but somehow familiar, like half-remembered dreams. A voice spoke behind her. "Welcome to the opportunity, Evangeline." She turned to see the tall man, his smile sharper than ever. "What is this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "The question isn't what," he said. "It's who. And soon, you'll understand." Before she could respond, the crowd swallowed him, leaving her alone with the compass, its needle pointing forward, urging her deeper into the unknown. It all started because of a silly sweater. A ridiculous, ugly, pilled-up green sweater with a giant stitched-on owl that had googly eyes. I never should have worn it to the office trivia night, but my partner, Mike, insisted it was my lucky charm. I've always been competitive, and trivia is my arena. My brain might be a jumble of random facts most of the time, but slap a microphone in my hand and call it a quiz night, and I'm unstoppable. Mike, on the other hand, doesn't take it nearly as seriously. He comes for the cheap beer and the nachos. This particular night, though, things took a turn. As the reigning trivia champ in our group, I've been talking myself up all week. I mean, why not? Trivia night is the one time my obscure knowledge of 16th century French desserts and lesser-known constellations makes me the star of the show. But as soon as we got to the bar, I felt the first pang of something off. Mike had that look, the one he gets when he's about to do something hilarious and unexpected, which almost always leads to embarrassment for someone. "You know," he said loudly, grinning at the group as we grabbed a table, I think it's my turn to lead us to victory tonight. You've been hogging all the glory, babe. The table laughed, and I forced a smile, though I felt a prickle of annoyance. Mike was charming, sure, but he was also what my mom would call a scene stealer. If someone was shining too brightly, Mike had this compulsive need to dim the light, usually with a joke at their expense. It was part of his charm, except when it wasn't. Sure, Mike, I said, keeping my voice light. But you might want to brush up on your geography first. Remember last time when you thought Budapest was in Italy? Hey, everyone knows geography is for nerds, he shot back, earning another laugh. But I've been brushing up on all the important stuff, like celebrity scandals and fast food mascots. You know, the real trivia categories. I rolled my eyes as the first round began. At first, I let him take the lead, leaning back and letting Mike bask in his moment. But then the host called for a literature question. In what year was Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice published? My heart skipped. That was my time to shine. I grabbed the answer sheet, but Mike swiped it before I could write. I got this, he said smugly, scrawling an answer. When the correct year, 1813, was announced, I nearly choked on my beer. 1830? I hissed. Mike, are you kidding me? Close enough, he said with a shrug, not even looking up from his nachos. It's not even remotely close. I shot back, my voice louder than I intended. A few heads turned, and I shrank into my chair, mortified. Mike didn't seem fazed. If anything, he was enjoying himself. Relax, it's just trivia, he said, grinning. But then he added, just loud enough for the others at our table to hear. Besides, maybe if you weren't wearing that hideous sweater, you'd be able to think straight. I froze. The table chuckled nervously, sensing the shift in energy. My face burned as I tried to brush it off with a laugh. But inside, I was seething. Sure, the sweater was ugly. That was the point. But Mike's dig felt personal, and I wasn't about to let it slide. Oh, you mean the sweater you picked out for me? You're right, it's atrocious. Almost as bad as your sense of direction. How's that Budapest in Italy theory holding up? The laughter this time was louder, more genuine, and Mike's smile faltered. Touché, he said, raising his beer in mock surrender. But his eyes gleamed with something that wasn't quite humor. I should have stopped there. I should have let it go. But then came the music round. The host played a clip of a classic 80s tune, and my brain instantly fired off the answer. Simple Minds, Don't You Forget About Me, I said confidently. But before I could write it down, Mike snatched the sheet again. Actually, it's Tears for Fears, he announced, scribbling his answer with the kind of confidence that made everyone else at the table nod in agreement. I stared at him, stunned. Mike? No. It's Simple Minds. I'm 100% sure. He waved me off. Babe, trust me. I know my 80s music. When the correct answer was revealed, Simple Minds, of course, our table groaned. Mike turned to me with a sheepish grin. Oops. My bad. You're bad? I snapped. Mike, this isn't karaoke night. Maybe let someone else answer if you don't know what you're talking about. Wow, he said, leaning back with exaggerated offense. Somebody takes this way too seriously. It's a trivia competition, Mike. The whole point is to take it seriously. You mean the point is to let you show off and make the rest of us feel like idiots? The words hit like a slap, and for a second, I was too stunned to respond. The table fell silent, everyone suddenly very interested in their drinks. Are you kidding me? I said finally, my voice trembling. You're the one who can't stand it when someone else gets the spotlight. God forbid I have one thing I'm good at without you turning it into a joke. Maybe if you weren't so desperate for attention, I wouldn't have to. It was like the air had been sucked out of the room. The host's voice echoed faintly in the background, announcing the next question, but no one at our table was paying attention. I grabbed my coat, ignoring the stares. I'm done, I said, standing. Good luck winning without your nerd. Don't worry, Mike shot back. I'm sure we'll manage just fine. The walk home was cold and silent, and the sweater, stupid, itchy, humiliating, felt like a weight pressing against my chest. By the time I reached my apartment, I was replaying every moment, every barb, every laugh, wondering where it had all gone so wrong. Was I too competitive? Did I make Mike feel small? Or was he just incapable of letting me have this one thing? When Alex suggested we co-host a housewarming party at her new place, I jumped at the chance. She'd just moved into this gorgeous loft downtown, with floor-to-ceiling windows and exposed brick walls that practically screamed Instagram-worthy. My apartment was still the size of a shoebox, so hosting something there was out of the question. Plus, Alex and I had always had this easy dynamic where our strengths balanced each other out. She had the social circle, I had the organizational skills. Match made in heaven, right? We decided to split the work. I'd handle the guest list, RSVPs, and drinks, while Alex would cover food, decorations, and the ambience. Her words, not mine. I remember joking, "Does ambience include a smoke machine?" And she laughed, saying, "No, but maybe disco lights." That was the last real conversation we had about the party before the day itself. I figured we both had our lanes and didn't need constant check-ins. Over the next few weeks, I sent out a sleek invite with a cheeky tagline, "Warm your cockles at Alex's loft warming," and kept track of RSVPs. I even splurged on a variety of booze, from craft beers to those fancy pre-mixed cocktails in cans that cost more than I want to admit. By the time the day rolled around, I was feeling smug. Everything on my end was covered. The first red flag was when I arrived at Alex's loft an hour before the party and found her sitting on the floor in yoga pants, scrolling through TikTok. No decorations, no food, and definitely no ambience. Are you in Zen mode before we party? Or? I asked, dropping my bags of drinks onto the kitchen counter. She looked up, confused. "Oh hey, you're early." "Early? The party starts in an hour." "Oh, yeah," she said, waving a hand like it was no big deal. "We've got time. I was thinking we just order some pizzas or something when people get here. You know, keep it casual." "Order pizzas?" My voice cracked. "What happened to your whole Pinterest vision board thing?" She frowned. "I mean, I pinned some stuff, but honestly, I thought you'd, bring some snacks or whatever. You're always so good at that." I stared at her, trying to figure out if she was joking. She wasn't. "Okay, but decorations? Plates? Literally anything?" She shrugged. "People don't care about that stuff. It's about the vibes." I felt my pulse ticking in my neck. The vibes? Yeah, like the people. The energy. She stretched out the word energy like it was some magical force that could conjure hors d'oeuvres out of thin air. I took a deep breath. "Alex, there are 30 people coming tonight. 30. They're going to walk in here, see bare walls, and immediately wish they'd stayed home to binge-watch true crime documentaries." She laughed, which somehow made it worse. "You're being dramatic. It'll be fine." Fine. Fine. I'd never hated a word more in my life. I should have argued harder or maybe stormed out to salvage my dignity, but instead, I went into panic mode. I started digging through her kitchen cabinets, hoping to cobble something together. What I found was a bag of stale popcorn, 3 cans of soup, and half a bottle of ranch dressing. Alex watched me flail for a few minutes before saying, Okay, I'll help. Let's at least put out some bowls or something." I glared at her. "Oh, great idea. Do you also want to sprinkle ranch on the floor as ambience?" Her mouth twitched like she wanted to laugh, but knew better. "Look, I didn't think it'd be such a big deal. I thought you'd, take charge. You're so type A." "Oh, so this is my fault now?" I snapped. "You had one job. Actually, no. You had 3 jobs. Food, decorations, and ambience. And now I'm supposed to magically fix everything? Well, you didn't exactly give me a checklist," she shot back. "I thought we were keeping it chill." By the time the doorbell rang, we were barely speaking. Alex grabbed the first guests and ushered them in with her usual effortless charm, while I stood by the kitchen island, trying to figure out how to turn a bowl of popcorn and a pack of gum I'd found in my purse into a centerpiece. People arrived in waves, and I could feel their confusion as they looked around the undecorated loft. Someone actually said, "Oh, is this one of those minimalist-themed parties?" And I wanted to crawl under the counter. Meanwhile, Alex floated from group to group, laughing and chatting like she hadn't just burned the whole event to the ground. At one point, I overheard her telling someone, "Yeah, we wanted to keep it super low-key." Less about the setup and more about the connection. The person nodded like she just shared some profound piece of wisdom, and I had to walk away before I said something I'd regret. The final straw came when someone asked me where the food was, and I pointed them toward the sad stack of pizza boxes we'd panic-ordered an hour into the party. They looked at me like I just handed them a plate of boiled cardboard. By the end of the night, I was exhausted and furious. Alex was still in full social butterfly mode, oblivious to the fact that I was barely holding it together. When the last guests left, she plopped onto the couch and sighed contentedly. That was fun, huh? I stared at her, incredulous. Are you kidding me? What? She said, genuinely confused. People seem to have a good time. I threw my hands up. Yeah, because I scrambled to make it happen while you sat around manifesting good vibes. Her face darkened. Wow. Okay. I didn't realize this was going to turn into a performance review. Sorry for not meeting your standards. Standards? Alex, this wasn't about standards. This was about you literally not doing anything. I did do something, she snapped. I hosted. I let 30 people into my home and made them feel welcome, which is more than you did with your passive-aggressive sighing all night. We went back and forth, each more stubborn than the other, until finally, I grabbed my coat and left. On the way home, I kept replaying the night, trying to figure out if I'd been unreasonable or if she really was just that clueless. Now I'm stuck wondering, was I too controlling? Should I have just let it go and enjoyed the party for what it was? Or was Alex completely out of line for assuming I'd do all the work? It started with a pot of soup, a simple, innocent pot of chicken noodle soup. My friend Luke, who's been like a brother to me since college, had come down with one of those nasty colds that turns your voice into a gravelly whisper and makes you look like you've aged a decade overnight. He sent a text complaining about how he'd barely eaten in 2 days, too tired to even order takeout. I knew Luke's mom used to make him soup when he was sick, and since she passed a few years ago, he hadn't really let anyone else take care of him. I figured this was my chance to step up. Luke always had my back when I needed it. So I grabbed my grandmother's recipe, put on some jazz, and spent the afternoon making the soup from scratch. Simmering chicken stock, perfectly julienning carrots, the whole 9 yards. I even stopped by the bakery to grab fresh sourdough because Luke loves to dip bread in his soup. I showed up at his apartment later that evening, a little smug about my good friend vibes. I rang the doorbell and waited, rocking on my heels, the pot of soup still warm in my hands. Luke opened the door looking like death warmed over, his eyes red-rimmed and his hair a mess. "Hey," he croaked. "What's all this?" "Soup delivery," I chirped, holding up the pot like a trophy. "Chicken noodle, homemade, just like your mom used to make. And sourdough." For a split second, I saw something soft in his expression, like he was actually touched. Then it vanished, replaced by a frown. Thanks, I guess. You didn't have to do all that." "It's no big deal," I said, brushing it off. "Let me put this in the kitchen." Luke hesitated, his hand gripping the edge of the door. "Actually, I don't think you should come in." I stopped mid-step. "What? Why?" "It's just, I'm a mess right now, okay? And my place is a disaster. I don't need you seeing it and judging me." I laughed, thinking he was joking, but his face stayed serious. "Look, I don't care if your place looks like a tornado hit it. I just want to help." "Yeah, well, sometimes help feels like pity," he muttered, crossing his arms. That threw me. Pity? It's soup, not a freaking charity drive. He rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding my eyes. "I didn't ask for soup, okay? I just needed some space." Now I was getting irritated. "Space? Luke, you texted me about how miserable you were. What was I supposed to do? Send a thumbs-up emoji and call it a day?" "I texted because I wanted to vent, not because I needed you to show up with a casserole dish like you're starring in some Hallmark movie." That stung. My temper flared before I could stop it. "Wow, okay. Next time, I'll just let you starve." He sighed, dragging a hand over his face. "This is what I mean. You're making it about you." That stopped me cold. "What are you even talking about?" "You do this thing," he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion, "where you try to fix everything instead of just being there. Like, yeah, the soup's nice, but it feels more like you're checking off a box on some good friend checklist than actually listening to what I need. I stared at him, my hands still clutching the pot. That's not fair, I said quietly. I made this because I care about you. And I appreciate it, he said, though he didn't sound like he meant it. But you don't get to decide what I need. The words hit like a gut punch. All I could think about was the hours I'd spent making that stupid soup, carefully chopping vegetables, tasting the broth over and over to make sure it was perfect. And now it sat between us, a symbol of how I'd apparently failed some unspoken test of friendship. Fine, I said, my voice tight. You don't want my help? Got it. I set the pot down on the floor by his feet and turned to leave, my face burning. Wait, Luke started, but I didn't stop. I barely made it to my car before the tears came. I felt ridiculous crying over soup, but it wasn't just the soup. It was the rejection. The way my attempt to be there for him had been twisted into something selfish. I replayed his words over and over on the drive home, wondering if he was right. Had I made it about me? Was I so caught up in being the hero that I didn't notice what he actually needed? The next day, I got a text from Luke. Just one line. Thanks for the soup. It was really good. I stared at it for a long time, unsure if it was an olive branch or an apology or just another way of saying, we're fine, let's not talk about it. I didn't reply. I didn't know how. So now I'm here, wondering if I'm the one who screwed up. Was I overbearing? Or was Luke being ungrateful? Is it really so bad to want to help someone you care about? I don't know anymore. AITA? I had no idea that a $5 bill could start a war, but here we are. My older sister, Liz, and I had a system, unspoken but sacred. We didn't tally every single penny owed to each other. If I grabbed coffee for us, she'd pick up lunch later. If she borrowed gas money, I'd expect her to spot me concert tickets someday. It wasn't a flawless system, but it worked. Until it didn't. Last Thursday, we stopped at a cafe after running errands. I paid for both our orders, an iced latte for her, an Americano for me, and she said, I'll get you back. Normal, right? Except 2 hours later, we were at a drugstore, and Liz came out with a bag of snacks and handed me a single Reese's cup. Here, she said, all smiles. We're even. I thought she was joking. You think a Reese's makes up for my $5? It's what you wanted, isn't it? She said, popping a Dorito into her mouth. Plus, you got a drink, I got snacks. Same difference. The audacity. Liz, the latte cost almost $6, and you got a full bag of stuff? Okay, accountant, she said with a laugh, brushing me off. We don't keep track like this. Exactly, I said, which is why you owe me, not the other way around. It should have ended there, a little banter, a mock argument, nothing serious. But Liz is Liz, which means she can't stand being wrong. All right, she said, digging through her purse. Here's a $5. Happy now? I stared at the crumpled bill like it was a loaded gun. Are you seriously being this dramatic? I'm not the one making it weird, she snapped, waving the money like it was a white flag. Take it or don't. I don't care. The way she said it, so flippant, so Liz, lit a fire in my chest. I snatched the bill and said, thanks. I'll frame it. Good idea, she shot back. You can hang it next to your other trophies for being a petty jerk. Now, here's where I messed up. Instead of de-escalating, I leaned into the chaos. Petty? I said, holding up the bill. You're the one acting like I demanded your kidney, not $5. It's embarrassing, honestly. Oh, I'm embarrassing, she said, dropping her bag of Doritos onto the passenger seat. You're the one who probably keeps a spreadsheet of everything I owe you. Maybe I should, I said. At least then you'd stop pretending a single Reese's cup counts as payment. Her jaw dropped. You're such a control freak. No wonder your relationships never work out. Ouch. I felt that one like a punch to the throat. And you're so chill, huh? That's why you're 30 and still living with mom and dad. That did it. She went silent, her lips pressed into a thin line, her face a storm cloud of suppressed fury. For a second, I thought she might cry, which made me feel worse. But then she said, pull over. What? Pull over. We were driving down Main Street, so I turned into a parking lot, heart pounding. I barely had time to put the car in park before Liz jumped out and slammed the door. She stalked off down the sidewalk, leaving me sitting there with the engine running and a $5 bill crumpled in my hand. I thought about following her, but my pride stopped me. Let her cool off, I told myself. She's the one overreacting. Besides, she had her phone. She wasn't stranded or anything. Still, I couldn't shake this gnawing guilt, even as I drove home alone. She showed up 2 hours later, ignoring me completely as she grabbed her stuff from my car and went inside. I thought about apologizing, but her parting words still echoed in my head. Control freak, relationships never work. It wasn't like she was innocent in all this. Since then, we've been in a cold war. She's avoiding me, and I'm avoiding her, both of us too stubborn to make the first move. Our mom keeps asking why Liz is sulking and why I'm slamming cabinets, but neither of us will explain. I've replayed the argument a dozen times, trying to figure out if I was the bigger jerk or if we're equally guilty. And honestly, I still don't know. So, Reddit. AITA? Rain drummed against the windows of the little bookshop, a symphony of soft percussion that echoed through the quiet streets outside. Inside, amidst the scent of old paper and varnished wood, a woman named Cecilia was locking the cash register for the evening. She didn't much mind the rain. Storms, in fact, were her favorite. They kept the shop serene, left her alone with her thoughts, and ensured she could close on time. But tonight wasn't like other nights. Tonight, something had shifted. A customer remained. He wasn't browsing, nor was he lingering by the counter waiting to check out. Instead, he stood in the farthest corner of the store, by a display of antique maps, his back turned to her. He had been there for hours, though Cecilia couldn't recall when he had come in. His presence was unsettling, not overtly, but in the way that felt like an itch just beyond the reach of her fingertips. She told herself it was fine. He was likely harmless, just another oddball who lost track of time in the labyrinth of shelves. She called out gently, "Sir? We're closing now." The man didn't move. Cecilia frowned, stepping out from behind the counter. She crossed the shop slowly, her footsteps muffled by the worn Persian rug. "Excuse me," she tried again. Her voice wavered, and she hated that it did. As she approached, the overhead light flickered. A coincidence, she told herself. A trick of the old wiring. When she reached the man's side, her heart stumbled. He was looking at the maps, yes, but not as one does when admiring old artifacts. His face was inches from the glass, his breath fogging the surface, his lips moving silently. "Sir," she said louder this time. The man turned to her, but it was like watching a doll's head twist, too mechanical, too precise. His eyes, gray and distant, locked onto hers. "They've gone," he whispered, the words barely audible over the rain. Cecilia felt a chill climb her spine. "I'm sorry," she said, more reflex than comprehension. "They've gone," he repeated, his voice louder, carrying a strange weight that seemed to thicken the air around them. Then, as if on cue, he turned and walked toward the door, his steps deliberate but unhurried. She exhaled, the tension in her chest releasing slightly. Just a strange man, she told herself, nothing to dwell on. But as he reached the door, he paused. Without turning, he said, "Check the back room." And then he was gone, the bell above the door tinkling faintly in his wake. Cecilia stared at the door, her mind racing. Check the back room? The phrase crawled under her skin, wrapping itself around her nerves like barbed wire. There was no reason to listen to him, no logic in entertaining his cryptic remark, but the weight of his tone made ignoring it impossible. Against her better judgment, she found herself walking toward the storeroom door. The rain seemed louder now, more insistent, as if urging her forward. The storeroom was dark, save for the faint glow of the emergency light overhead. She flipped the switch, and the fluorescence buzzed reluctantly to life. The room was just as she had left it, boxes stacked neatly, inventory shelved and labeled. But something felt off. It was the silence. The rain, which had been so thunderous just moments ago, was muted here, as if she had stepped into a vacuum. Cecilia's breath hitched, and she moved deeper into the room. Her eyes scanned the space, searching for something, anything, that might explain the stranger's ominous words. And then she saw it. Near the back wall, where a curtain of cobwebs veiled a forgotten corner, a door stood ajar. It shouldn't have been there. She had worked in this shop for years, knew every nook and cranny, and there was no door. Yet here it was, its wood splintered and aged, as though it had existed for centuries. Cecilia hesitated, her pulse hammering in her throat. Every rational part of her screamed to leave it alone, to lock the storeroom and go home. But the pull of curiosity, that insidious whisper in her mind, was stronger. She approached the door, her fingers brushing the cold metal of the handle. Beyond the threshold, an oppressive darkness loomed, so absolute it seemed to absorb the light from the room behind her. Taking a deep breath, Cecilia stepped through. The air changed instantly. It was thick, humid, and carried a scent she couldn't place. Something metallic and earthy, like iron and moss. She fumbled for her phone, activating the flashlight. The beam cut through the dark, revealing a narrow corridor lined with walls of rough-hewn stone. It was unlike anything she'd ever seen, ancient and foreboding, as though it belonged to another time. As she moved forward, the sense of wrongness grew. The walls seemed to hum faintly, a low vibration she felt in her teeth. The corridor twisted and turned in ways that defied logic, the geometry unnatural, the angles impossible. She lost track of time, her footsteps echoing endlessly in the void. And then, abruptly, the corridor opened into a cavernous space. At its center stood a structure, a monolith of black stone, slick and gleaming as though wet. Strange symbols were etched into its surface, pulsating faintly with an inner light. Around it, shadows writhed, moving without source or form. Cecilia's stomach churned, and the flashlight trembled in her hand. She should have turned back, but her legs carried her forward, as if drawn by an invisible force. The symbols on the monolith seemed to shift as she approached, rearranging themselves into patterns that tickled the edge of her understanding. "You shouldn't be here." The voice was low, resonant, and came from everywhere at once. Cecilia froze, her blood running cold. "I didn't mean to," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. The door." "Not all doors are meant to be opened," the voice replied. There was no malice in it, only a profound, crushing weight. Before she could respond, the monolith began to vibrate. The light within the symbols grew brighter, and the shadows around it converged, spiraling upward in a chaotic dance. The air crackled, charged with an energy that made Cecilia's hair stand on end. And then, just as suddenly, it stopped. The cavern was silent. The monolith was dark. The shadows were gone. Cecilia blinked, her heart pounding as she realized she was no longer in the cavern. She was back in the storeroom, standing by the open door. The rain drummed faintly against the windows again, and the shop was as quiet and still as before. The door was gone. Cecilia staggered out into the main shop, her legs shaky. She looked around, half expecting the strange man to reappear, but the space was empty. Everything was as it had been, yet nothing felt the same. From that night forward, the bookshop was never just a bookshop to her. She couldn't explain what had happened, nor did she try to. All she knew was that some doors, once opened, leave a part of them behind, and some shadows, once seen, never quite let go. The first time I met Todd, he was standing in my tomato patch, holding a handful of my ripe heirlooms and munching on one like it was an apple. I didn't even know someone had moved into the other half of the duplex until I saw his U-Haul out front the night before. He looked up, juice dripping down his chin, and grinned. "These are incredible," he said, as if I had personally offered them to him. "You grow these yourself?" "Yeah," I said, a little stunned. "And you're standing in my garden." "Oh, sorry," he said, not looking sorry at all. He plucked another tomato, tossed it in the air, and caught it with one hand. "I'm Todd. Nice to meet you, neighbor." That was the beginning of my feud with Todd. At first, I told myself it was a misunderstanding. Maybe he didn't know the tomatoes were off-limits. But the next morning, I found a pile of tomato stems in the garden and footprints trampling my basil. I marched over to his door and knocked, only to be met with muffled laughter and the sound of a blender whirring inside. When he finally opened the door, he was holding a glass of tomato juice. My tomato juice. Hey, maybe don't take stuff from my garden? I said, trying to keep my voice calm. It's kind of mine. Oh, for sure, Todd said, nodding vigorously. Totally get it. Won't happen again. It happened again, and again. And then it wasn't just the tomatoes. It was my herbs, my cucumbers, even the tiny bell peppers I'd been nursing along for months. I'd find Todd lounging on the shared patio, tossing sliced cucumbers into his mouth, or sprinkling my homegrown dill onto whatever monstrosity he was grilling. Every time I confronted him, he'd wave me off with a breezy, "Relax, it's just veggies." So, I decided to take action. I started planting decoy vegetables, cheap supermarket tomatoes, bitter greens, things I didn't care about. The good stuff went into a raised bed in the backyard, out of Todd's reach. I even rigged up a sprinkler system with a motion sensor aimed at the original garden, just in case. The first time Todd triggered the sprinkler, I was inside, sipping tea and savoring my small victory. Then I heard him shouting, "Are you kidding me?" Todd bellowed, dripping wet on the patio. "You're booby-trapping the garden now?" "It's called protecting my property," I shot back through the window. "You're being ridiculous," he said, shaking water out of his hair like an overgrown golden retriever. "You've got enough veggies for a whole farmer's market." "Because I grow them, Todd," I shouted. "You're not entitled to my hard work." He stormed off, muttering something about how he was just trying to be neighborly, as if stealing produce was some kind of friendly gesture. I thought that would be the end of it. I underestimated Todd. A week later, I woke up to find plastic flamingos planted all over my yard. At first, I laughed. Who even owns this many flamingos? But when I tried to move them, I realized he'd driven them deep into the ground. It took me an hour to pull them all out, and when I looked over at Todd's patio, he was sitting there with a beer, grinning. "You don't like them," he called out. "Thought they'd liven up your garden." "Very funny," I said, chucking one of the flamingos into his yard. "Oh, no, he said, wagging his finger. "Yours to keep, neighbor." I decided to escalate. That night, while Todd was out, I hauled my old college speakers onto the patio and blasted whale songs on repeat. Loud. By the time he came home, the neighborhood sounded like a National Geographic special. Todd banged on my door, but I pretended I couldn't hear him over the melodic moaning of a humpback. The next morning, my car was covered in sticky notes. Hundreds of them, each one with a poorly drawn tomato on it. Todd had even stuck some to the windows, so I couldn't see out. I spent half an hour peeling them off, and by the time I was done, I was ready to throw hands. Instead, I grabbed a bag of birdseed and sprinkled it liberally around his patio. Within an hour, there was a veritable Hitchcockian nightmare of pigeons swarming his grill. Todd retaliated by building a birdhouse, an ugly, oversized monstrosity that he mounted directly on the fence dividing our properties. He filled it with seed every morning, ensuring the pigeons stuck around. I countered by buying a scarecrow, a creepy, human-sized thing with glowing eyes that lit up at night. I positioned it so it faced his bedroom window. The scarecrow lasted all of one night before Todd decapitated it with a shovel. I woke up to find the severed head sitting on my doorstep, along with a note, "Nice try. Love, Todd." At this point, the entire neighborhood was invested. People would stop me on the street to ask about the latest antics. I overheard a kid telling his mom, "I think they're gonna fight for real." One elderly woman actually applauded me after I hung a banner on Todd's side of the patio that said, "Free pest removal. Call Todd." The breaking point came when Todd decided to install tiki torches all around his side of the patio. He hosted a loud, smoky barbecue that sent plumes of meat-scented air wafting into my open windows. I retaliated by grilling fish on my side the next night, tuna steaks, shrimp skewers, and a whole salmon. The smell drove Todd nuts. He leaned over the fence, yelling about how I was poisoning the vibe, and I shouted back that he was poisoning the air. Finally, someone called the landlord. We were summoned to a joint meeting in his cramped office, where he listened to our grievances with the patience of a man who deeply regretted ever renting to us. By the end of it, Todd was forced to dismantle his birdhouse, and I had to promise to remove my motion sensor sprinkler. The landlord also threatened to evict us both if we didn't start acting like adults. For a while, things were quiet. Todd stopped stealing my tomatoes, and I stopped booby-trapping the garden. But every now and then, I'll find a plastic flamingo on my lawn, or he'll hear whale songs wafting through the wall at 2 a.m. And every time, I wonder, AITA? My grandma's chess set, to be exact. She used to pull it out for special occasions, which really just meant any time she felt like showing off. She called it her Moscow marble set, though I doubt it ever actually came from Russia. It had these intricate black and white marble pieces that felt satisfyingly heavy in your hand. I remember being a kid, sitting across from her as she trounced me in game after game, her knotted fingers nudging pieces into place with a little smirk. After she passed, the chess set went to my older brother, Liam, because apparently being the firstborn means you get everything. I didn't really mind. Liam loved it more than I did. Or at least, he said he did. Fast forward to last month. I'd been invited to this themed dinner party, hosted by my friend Clara, who always has to do the most. The theme? Cold War intrigue. Yes, really. She told everyone to bring something related to the era, and for some reason, my brain immediately went to the chess set. It felt perfect, a Cold War aesthetic icon. I figured it would be cool to set it up in the living room, maybe even play a couple of games while sipping martinis. Liam wouldn't care. He hardly ever touched the thing anymore. It was just sitting on a shelf in his study, collecting dust. I'd bring it back the next day, and he'd never even notice it was gone. So, I swung by his place while he was out. I have a key because I water his plants when he's on work trips. Honestly, I felt a little smug as I carefully packed up the chess set and its velvet-lined case. Like I was being resourceful. Clever. I even took extra care to cushion it in my tote bag with a rolled-up hoodie. No way anything could happen to it. Clara's party was a lot. People showed up in trench coats and fake mustaches, and one guy had a briefcase full of fake classified documents that he kept accidentally leaving behind like some kind of spy. I set up the chess set on the coffee table, and it was an instant hit. Everyone loved the authentic touch, and someone even jokingly called me Bobby Fischer. Clara took a ton of pictures for Instagram, positioning the pieces just so, and I felt pretty pleased with myself. Then this guy named Evan. You know the type? Floppy hair, loud laugh, thinks he's good at everything. Challenged me to a game. I couldn't say no. Half the room gathered around as we started playing, drinks in hand, the energy electric. It was going great until Evan, who was losing badly, decided to get dramatic. He knocked over my knight with an exaggerated sweep of his queen, sending it skidding across the table. Before I could grab it, it tipped off the edge and hit the hardwood floor with a sickening crack. The room went silent. I picked up the knight, and my stomach dropped. The marble base had shattered into 3 jagged pieces. My bad, Evan said, clearly trying not to laugh. Guess that's checkmate? I wanted to throttle him. Instead, I smiled tightly and mumbled something about it being no big deal. But inside, I was panicking. This wasn't just some random chess piece. It was part of Grandma's set, a family heirloom, and Liam was going to lose his mind. I spent the rest of the night brooding in a corner, Googling how to repair broken marble. Spoiler, the results weren't promising. The party wound down, and I went home with a pit in my stomach and a broken chess piece in my bag. The next morning, I tried to fix it myself. I bought superglue and carefully lined up the pieces, but no matter how hard I tried, there was a visible crack running through the base. It looked awful. I briefly considered just not giving it back. Maybe I could say it got lost? But Liam isn't stupid. He'd know. So, I brought the set back to his house that evening, feeling like a kid returning a report card with a failing grade. He was sitting at his kitchen table when I walked in, the case tucked under my arm. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. "I borrowed the chess set for a thing. Hope that's okay." He looked up, raising an eyebrow. "You borrowed it?" "Yeah, for Clara's party. It was this whole Cold War theme, and I thought it'd be perfect. People loved it." Liam frowned. "You didn't ask." "I meant to. I lied. You weren't home, and it was kind of a last-minute thing." He sighed. "It's fine. Just put it back where you found it." I hesitated. So, There's one tiny problem. His frown deepened. What kind of problem? I opened the case and handed him the night, trying to keep my face neutral. He stared at it for a long moment, turning it over in his hand. "Are you serious?" he finally said. "It was an accident." I blurted. "This guy at the party knocked it over. I tried to fix it, but..." "This isn't fixable," he snapped. "Do you have any idea what this set means?" "Of course I do," I said, feeling defensive. "But it's just one piece. The rest of the set is fine." He slammed the knight onto the table, and I flinched. "It's not about the piece. This was Grandma's. She gave it to me because she trusted me to take care of it. You didn't even ask." I wanted to argue, to say it wasn't fair for him to hoard something so special if he wasn't going to use it. But the look on his face stopped me. He wasn't just angry, he was hurt. Like I'd crossed some invisible line I didn't even know existed. "I'll replace it," I said weakly. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You can't replace this. It's not about money. It's about..." He stopped himself, shaking his head. "Forget it. Just go." I left without another word, the weight of his disappointment following me home. I can't stop replaying the scene in my head, trying to decide if I'm really the bad guy here. I didn't mean to break it. I didn't even mean to take it without asking. I just wanted to borrow it for one night. It started with an old box of cassette tapes. My brother Eric had been having a rough time lately. He lost his job a few months ago, and though he wouldn't admit it, I knew he was spiraling. Eric's always been the stoic type, the guy who shrugs off his problems like they're no big deal. But his recent demeanor, quiet, distant, like he was moving through life underwater, was breaking my heart. I wanted to do something for him, but I knew anything too obvious would make him clam up. That's when I found the tapes. Eric and I used to record ourselves as kids, making up ridiculous radio shows. We had fake call-ins, absurdly bad commercials for products like flavored socks or soap for your hair, shampoo, but we didn't know that at the time. And these painfully awkward interviews with our dog, Mac's mom had saved the tapes, probably as blackmail material, but I stumbled across them while cleaning out the attic. That's when the idea hit me. I could recreate one of those shows, not just with the old recordings, but as a live, surprise event. Eric used to dream about being on the radio when we were kids, and though he'd outgrown the ambition, I figured tapping into that nostalgia might pull him out of his funk. It wasn't just about the show. It was about reminding him of a time when he was fearless and creative, before life started knocking him down. The plan spiraled quickly. I reached out to a couple of our childhood friends and even got Mom in on it. We'd host a fake live broadcast at my place. I dug out the old boombox to play snippets of the tapes and wrote a loose script full of inside jokes, goofy commercials, and breaking news about our hometown. I even found someone selling a vintage on-air sign to hang above the setup. The day of the event, I was buzzing with excitement. Eric thought he was just coming over for pizza and beer when he walked in and saw the setup, complete with the boombox, makeshift mics, and the on-air sign glowing in the corner. He froze. "What is this?" he asked, a smile already tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Welcome to Radio Blast from the past," I said, mimicking the announcer voice we used as kids. "Tonight's special guest, my big brother and former co-host, Eric the Rock Reed." He laughed, shaking his head. "Oh my God, no way." "Yes way," I said, dragging him to the couch. "Come on, it's been too long since we graced the airwaves together." For a while, it was perfect. We played a couple of clips from the old tapes, and Eric's laughter was so genuine it felt like sunlight in a room I hadn't realized was dim. He even joined in on a skit we'd written, stumbling through it just like old times. I could see him letting go, even if just for a moment. I thought, this is working. He needed this. But then things took a turn. One of the tapes I'd chosen was from the summer after Eric's high school graduation, the one where he had the lead role in a terrible community play and thought he was going to be famous. I'd included it because it was hilarious and sweet, full of his over-the-top Shakespearean impressions and terrible ad-libs. I thought he'd find it funny. Instead, as the tape played, I saw his smile disappear. "Wow," he said flatly when the clip ended. "Real nice. Let's play the one where I'm crying in the bathroom next, huh?" I blinked. "What are you talking about? It's just a funny tape. We loved making those." Yeah then. Now it's just a reminder of how stupid I was, thinking I was going to be something. He got up, pacing. Is that what this is about? Making fun of me? Eric, no. I said, stunned. This was supposed to be fun. I thought it would make you laugh, help you remember. Remember what? That I peaked at 18? He gestured to the setup. This whole thing is a joke. My life's already in the gutter, and you thought this would help? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I thought it would remind you of how creative you are, how you used to take risks and… Yeah, well, maybe don't remind me of who I used to be when I can't even figure out who I am now, he snapped. The room went silent. Our friends shifted awkwardly, and Mom looked like she wanted to disappear into the wallpaper. Eric grabbed his coat, muttered something about needing air, and walked out the door. I just stood there, stunned. All the planning, all the effort, and somehow I'd managed to make him feel worse. I sat down, staring at the boom box like it had betrayed me. One of our friends awkwardly patted my shoulder and said, "He'll cool off." You meant well? But that didn't make it hurt any less. I wanted to remind Eric of a time when he felt strong, creative, unstoppable. Instead, I'd accidentally rubbed salt in wounds I didn't even know he had. Now I'm sitting here, replaying the night in my head, wondering if I crossed a line or just caught him on a bad day. Maybe I should have asked him first, but would he have even agreed? My best friend, Marco, was getting married last month, and the wedding was a big deal. Destination affair. All expenses paid for the bridal party, the works. I wasn't in the bridal party, but I'd been invited early to hang out and help with last-minute stuff. It was a small price to pay for 4 days at a luxury resort. Marco's fiancée, Lila, was sweet enough, but she had this intensity about her, the kind that made everything feel like a test. She'd smile, but her eyes would narrow like she was trying to figure out whether you passed the unspoken criteria in her head. I was already gearing up for a weekend of tiptoeing around her expectations when, the night before I was supposed to fly out, I got an email about a rare book auction I'd been following for months. It was happening the same weekend as the wedding. To most people, an auction might not sound like a big deal, but this was the auction. A first edition of a novel I'd been hunting for years was up for grabs, one I'd practically dreamed about owning. And it wasn't just any auction. This was a private, invite-only event that I'd somehow lucked into after months of schmoozing with the right people. Missing it felt unthinkable. The wedding suddenly felt negotiable. At first, I tried convincing myself I could do both. The auction was in the city. The wedding was 2 states away. But as I calculated flight times and realized I'd be missing chunks of the wedding festivities, the truth sank in. I had to choose. And if I was being honest, the choice wasn't hard. Marco would be mad. Sure, but weddings happen all the time. Opportunities like this auction? Once in a lifetime. The next morning, I called Marco. Hey, listen, I started, already cringing. Something's come up, and I'm not going to make it to the wedding. What? His voice was sharp with disbelief. You're joking, right? I wish I were. I lied. It's work-related. Big project deadline I can't move. Work? You've known about this wedding for a year, Dylan. A year. You're really going to bail on me for some job? It's not like that, I said, fumbling for the right words. I'm really sorry, but I can't afford to lose this opportunity. You can't afford to lose this. He cut himself off, and when he spoke again, his tone was ice cold. Wow. Okay. Thanks for letting me know, I guess. The call ended abruptly, and I sat there, staring at my phone. Part of me wanted to explain everything, the auction, how much the book meant to me, but I knew Marco wouldn't understand. He wasn't a collector. He didn't get what it was like to see a piece of your soul sitting there, waiting to be claimed. So, I decided not to tell him. What he didn't know couldn't hurt him, right? The auction was everything I'd hoped for and more. The thrill of bidding, the adrenaline when I won the first edition, the quiet euphoria of holding it in my hands. It was a high unlike anything else. I told myself it was worth it, even as my phone buzzed nonstop with texts and missed calls from mutual friends at the wedding. Apparently, Marco was furious. Lila, too. I ignored most of the messages, figuring things would blow over once the wedding chaos died down. But then the group chat lit up. Someone, probably Lila, had made a passive-aggressive post on Instagram about people who value objects over relationships. A few of Marco's college friends commented, clearly referring to me, calling me a flake and worse. Even my ex chimed in with a snide, not surprised. I stayed quiet. What could I say? The truth? That I ditched my best friend's wedding for a book? A few days later, Marco finally called. I was nervous, but ready to smooth things over. I'd rehearsed my apology, emphasizing how much I regretted missing the wedding. But when I picked up, he didn't even let me start. You're unbelievable, he snapped. I needed you there, Dylan. Do you know how many times I told people you were coming? How embarrassing it was to explain why my so-called best friend bailed at the last minute. Marco, You lied to me, he interrupted. Work? Really? You think I didn't figure out what you were doing? My stomach sank. What are you talking about? I saw your post, Dylan, he said, his voice shaking with anger. The one about the Holy Grail book. You couldn't even wait a week to gloat about it? I felt a cold wave of dread. I had posted about the book, a casual photo of the cover with a caption about dreams coming true. I hadn't thought much of it at the time, but of course, Marco would see it. And of course, he'd connect the dots. Marco, I can explain. Don't bother, he said. You made your choice. Hope it was worth it. The line went dead, and for a long time, I just sat there, staring at the book. It was beautiful, perfect, everything I'd ever wanted. But for the first time, I wondered if it had cost me more than I'd realized. Since then, Marco hasn't spoken to me. Neither has Lila. Our mutual friends are divided. Some think I was selfish. Others get why I did it. I'm still not sure how I feel. I don't regret buying the book, but I do regret the way I handled everything. I could have been honest. I could have tried harder to make both things work, but I didn't. And now, the question's been gnawing at me. AITA?